I'm June Gruber, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder and director of the Mental Health Expert Series. I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. Amelia Aldao, the founder and director of Together CBT and visiting scholar at Columbia University, about her work on the treatment of anxiety and mood disorders. So, Ame, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about the kind of mental health work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do two things right now. I run a clinic here in New York City. We specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety, stress related conditions. So I work with patients directly, and I also train postdocs and grad students, and also medical residents as well. So that's about sort of 50, 60% of my time. And then the other, I want to say 40 to 50% of the time, I actually do a fair amount of consulting for companies that are mental health startups. And primarily they're trying to develop sort of scalable solutions to disseminate CBT. So I help them kind of develop products and solutions that are CBT friendly, but that also can be disseminated relatively easily, or at least relatively fast.
So how did you go about getting started in this really amazing line of work that you're doing?
Well, thank you for saying it's amazing. I'll say it's fun. So it's my career, as you know, has taken a few turns. I was a graduate student at Yale. I specialized in emotion regulation, in anxiety, depression, mood disorders. Sorry, that's my phone. This is the pandemic times we're living in. So yeah, I did research. I was on a heavy research track. I always loved clinical work, but my program was very much research focused, and I liked that a lot. Did my internship here in New York at Cornell, which was a great time. It was a pure clinical internship, so I actually spent the whole year just getting into clinical work a lot more. And then I went into the academic route. So I was an assistant professor at Ohio State for about 4 years. I opened a lab, had grad students, and continued to do research on emotion regulation as a transdiagnostic process. Oh, sorry, the dog. Where was I? Yeah, and then through a combination of personal, professional reasons, just life in general, I made it, at the time, really difficult choice to leave academia. Spent a couple of years doing management consulting for a big three consulting firm, Boston Consulting Group, or BCG. Yeah, and then I did that for a couple of years. It was a great experience to learn about business and the intersection of psychology, marketing, consumer behavior. And yeah, and then I decided to sort of, put together all of those experiences and try to put together something that made sense for me at a time. And that's how I got to this point of, doing clinical work, doing teaching a little bit, right, and particularly clinical training, and then also doing consulting. So I'm constantly meeting new people. I'm constantly working with new teams. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But I don't think anything is very static when it comes to a career. So this works great for me now, but I'm totally open to keep changing and pivoting and evolving over the years. And I think that's the main message. I'm sort of getting ahead a bit, but that's really the main message that I like to tell students, friends, family members, just, my clients, really everyone in my life, that it's never too late to sort of take a good look at what you're doing and find different ways of rebuild yourself and recreate yourself and your career.
I mean, I love that. And I love the theme just about being dynamic and flexible over the course of your life. And I'm wondering, as you're thinking about these kind of ways of, yourself and your career evolving over time, what have stood out to you as sort of, notable frustrations, but also successes that you've really been able to savor along the way?
Yeah, it's a good question. When it comes, I'll start with the frustrations so I can end on the high note. The frustrations to me with academia were the pace. It goes without saying, it takes forever to get a paper accepted. It takes forever to get a grant application. It takes forever for, within school administration for most things to happen. At the same time, when I was doing consulting full time, I was also frustrated by the pace. That was way too fast. It was sort of like, you would wake up in the morning learning about a problem that needed to be solved, and you had a few hours to do it, right? There wasn't this idea of I could take my time and read a bunch of papers and talk to a bunch of people. So that was also very frustrating to me. So over the years, what I have come to appreciate is, at least for me personally, is that it really matters to me to find that balance of going fast but not going too fast, and sort of being able in a way to get carried away by things that I'm interested in, but also being able to stop, and not necessarily let work bleed so much into my life, which is something that as grad students, as professors, it happens a lot. In any profession, really, when you're creative, it happens a lot. So sort of realizing that that boundary and that balance was important for me was a way of sort of, learning to manage those frustrations. That's also obviously before COVID. Now everything is up in the air, work, life, right? Everything is blending into each other. But at least, for the last couple of years, I was able to do that. And then in terms of like the good moments, I know this is probably going to be a bit cheesy, but for me, really, it came down to the people. It was, having really interesting papers that I wrote with my mentors in grad school, or, building a team and building a lab when I was a professor. Or, when you do consulting, you tend to travel to all these places and it's you and a group of people and you spend days and weeks together in all these random parts of the country, sometimes random parts of the world. So I really like the sense of sort of having a bubble, now we use the term bubble a lot, but a group of people that I was, working with and spending all my time with. And same right now, what I enjoy the most is growing my clinic, working with people, working with trainees. And as I mentioned, in my consulting work, I get to meet a lot of new people all the time, who are some very interesting characters, because I get to meet a lot of business people who are very good at business strategy and tech, but they don't really know a lot about mental health, but they're super interested. So it's almost a way of teaching as well. I learned business from them and I learned strategy from them, and I get to sort of teach them about CBT and evidence-based practices. So yeah, I don't know. To me, it really comes down to, to the people and the work environments. And I think that's another take-home message, I suppose, that, it's, people really matter, and it makes a big difference, who are the people you work with and who are your teams. So, doesn't mean that you always get to work with the most perfect people all the time, or that you'll get along with everybody, but trying to optimize for that, I think is really important.
And what do you see as the most important next steps in the field looking ahead?
Maybe I'm biased because this is sort of where I am right now, but to me, it's really all about dissemination. We, in the CBT world, we have amazing treatments. We know they work pretty well. Obviously not for everybody, obviously not most of the time. And we still have a long way to go in terms of research into minorities and into all kinds of issues that have to do with diversity, right? So we still have work to do. But that said, we have really good treatments, particularly for the type of work I do when it comes to anxiety, OCD, depression, mood disorders. And I think the emphasis right now, I think should really be on trying to find ways of disseminating treatments, but whether it's single session interventions, I'm a big fan of that work. Whether it's, creating apps, whether it's coming up with new scalable solutions, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's social media or, type of social media networks. I think that's really where the field needs to be going, versus spending more time refining a treatment that we already know works pretty well. We've had a mental health crisis for a very long time in this country, and it's only getting worse by now, right? The anxiety, depression, mood, burnout issues that people are having right now as a consequence of COVID, and that will continue to for the foreseeable future. It's unprecedented, right? So I think that it would be great to see more funding, more resources, more of a culture really just in our world of people focusing on that. And kind of coming back, I think that was also one of my frustrations at the time. I was really having fun with the work that I was doing. I did a lot of experimental stuff. So very much, looking at processes, looking at mechanisms in the lab. I loved it. It was really intellectually stimulating, but I was also getting very itchy because I knew it would take years or decades for that work to trickle down to people. And then it would only trickle down to those people who had access, to people who are privileged, to people who could afford it, right? So again, I think we have a long way to go in terms of increasing access for everyone of our treatments.
Sort of along that line, and I know you alluded to some really wise advice earlier on today, but what advice would you have for people who are, let's say, watching this interview today? Maybe it's students, maybe it's scholars, or just the public interested in mental health. What might you say to them?
Wow, that's a big question. For people who are more on the trainee side or people who are on the professional end, right? I think the biggest word of advice that I would give them, or that I would give my younger self, if you will, is this idea that it's when you're really passionate about your work, like many of our grad students, professors, scholars tend to be. It's okay to also allow yourself to do other things and to explore other interests, um, even if they don't lead to anything in particular, even if you're not doing it with the intention of getting a job or getting a paper or getting a grant, but sort of allowing yourself to have more time to explore, to connect with other, and this comes down very tactically to connecting with people in your university, connecting with people outside of your area, outside of your department, connecting with people in the city where you're, or the town where your school is. We don't do that as much. We spend 5 6 years or even longer in this bubble, and I think what was really good for me, and I wish I had done more of, was sort of opening up to meeting new people and having new experiences. I think if you do that, it makes your research more interesting. It makes you happier. It helps you balance your work and your life a bit more. And it might open up new career opportunities as well, as you get to see other people who go into different fields or go into industry, or do different things with life. So for people who might be listening to this who are sort of on the academic track, I think it's the idea that you can always pivot, and sort of stepping away from this false dichotomy, especially for us clinical psychologists, that either you're a researcher or a clinician. You could be both at the same time or at different times in your life. There's times in my life when I was pretty much 100% researcher, like 90% researcher. Now I'm more on the other end. Maybe I'm 90% clinician. I do very little research, and it's going to change over time. So I think sort of stepping away from that false dichotomy is really important. And also there's other things. It's not just research, teaching, or clinical work, right? There's many, many new things that many of you can do, and again, and in combination with, I think sort of stepping away from either or is good. And then for people who might be listening to this, who may not necessarily be in the field, but may be interested in mental health, it's hard to come up with one piece of advice, but I think the more you can do to foster conversations with other people about mental health, the more of an impact you can have on this world. I mean, one of the biggest, I mean, there's many, many challenges to mental health dissemination, mental health treatment dissemination, but one of them is stigma. I mean, cost is a big one. So we're not going to deny cost. Cost is a big, big problem. But there's also stigma. And sometimes, and I'm not saying go pour your heart and tell all your problems to everybody because that's not probably the way to go. But be more open. If you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you have other issues, substance abuse problem, eating disorder, whatever the problems might be, sometimes opening up about your experiences or being curious and asking other people about theirs, I think that can go a long way. Part of what I find to be sort of like a very interesting sort of side effect of COVID, it's been that it has opened up a lot of the conversation about mental health, because this has been such an unprecedented crisis, and people started opening up and talking about things in ways that they wouldn't otherwise. It's a shame that it took such a big tragedy for people to start opening up, and we still need a lot more opening up. But I think it's, in that sense, I'm kind of optimistic. I think things are going in the right direction. So that would be my word of, I don't know, advice, or my takeaway message for people who are not necessarily in the field, but who are interested in mental health.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was wonderful as always.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, June. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me.